I'm the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I'm going to talk about the Great Free Will Debate. Chapter 1, Introduction. I put it to you that most people believe they have free will. They believe they have free will because they feel it within themselves. While we may have no way to definitively know what others are thinking and feeling, we know what we are thinking and feeling. Outwardly, we cannot see someone else's thoughts and feelings, though we can see their actions and behaviors. We likewise can observe our own actions and behaviors, but it is more than mere observation. It is not like we are sitting within our bodies and then observing ourselves doing things, like a passenger in a vehicle, albeit one made of flesh. We recognize that the source of our actions and behaviors come from within ourselves, where there is an immediacy connecting our intentions and actions. When we act, we have the intuition that it is us that are doing things, and not someone that is not us doing things that we merely observe happening to us. This is an unlearned intuition, not a learned response of one who has studied the relevant theories or pondered deeply over free will. I can imagine some of the more pedantic among you out there questioning, how do you know what regular people understand and believe? Of course, I have not gone and conducted a survey. Even if I had, I could not have spoken to every single person in existence. And even if I had, I have not also asked the ones who have passed away and the ones not yet born. It is an impossible task. However, it is an intuition that I believe is correct. The test of whether my ball claim is justified is for readers to ask themselves, do they understand what I am talking about, or do they think my claims so far, that regular people believe they have free will, are wrong? Not as a scholar or a professional of any sort, but just as a regular person. Yet, peculiarly enough, the consensus opinion among professional philosophers is that we do not have free will, or at least not free will as a regular person would understand it to be. In 2020, one question in a survey of professional philosophers was about free will. 1,758 responded, of which 59% say they are compatibilists, 11% think we do not have free will, and only 19% think that we do have free will. The survey does not use the word determinism, but I shall. Adding the determinists, which constitute 11%, and the 59% who are compatibilists, together makes 70%. Briefly, determinism is where all events are determined by prior events in an ineluctable chain of cause and effect. Compatibilism is a type of determinism where one thinks one has alternative possibilities to choose from, but whatever choice is made is in fact determined. A person will never be able to choose the other option, even if she feels or thinks she is able to. For instance, say you are thirsty and presented with a cup of boiling sulfur or a cup of cool spring water. While you indeed have a choice, do you really, if you are always going to choose the spring water? Finally, libertarianism was the choice of 19% of those surveyed. Libertarianism is the free will that I say most people intuitively believe they possess. That despite the cause and effect of the natural world, human beings are unique and special, that they really are able to make a free choice, not a false one between drinking sulfur or spring water, but a genuine one, like between still or sparkling water the way diners are offered in a restaurant. More formally, Christian List tells us that libertarian free will has three properties which are jointly necessary and sufficient. 1. Intentional agency, where the being has the ability to form goals and take action towards those goals. 2. Alternative possibilities, among which the agent can genuinely choose from. And 3. Causal control, where the agent's mental state formed by her intentions is the cause of her choice. Chapter 2. Determinism. So why is it that the professional philosophers, who compared to the general population are presumably more thoughtful, think that determinism is how the situation stands? To understand that, we have to examine what determinism is. When one billiard ball hits the other moves. The first ball is the cause of the effect of the second ball's motion. This cause and effect is regarded as a universal law, one that applies to all things. Determinism seems to work well for inanimate objects through well-established scientific laws. Libertarians do not dispute that. If all that exists are material objects, then cause and effect is the ineluctable relation governing the interaction between these objects. What libertarians have a problem with is when determinism is applied to living things, specifically human beings. However, for the determinists, since living things are part of nature, there is no reason to believe that the law of nature of causality does not apply to them. Determinism when applied to living things is similar to when applied to non-living things, but perhaps with an additional layer beyond physical interactions. Arthur Schopenhauer calls this additional determination the law of motives, a notion he inherited from Thomas Hobbes. Between going to the cinema and staying in to study, our protagonist, Jones, may choose to go to the cinema. While a libertarian may explain it as a matter of free choice, of the free will of the agent, Jones, Schopenhauer attributes it to motives plus character. The competing motives in this case are between being entertained and preparing for the exams. Jones's character is disposed towards instant gratification compared to the delayed rewards of education. Besides, the exams are still a while away. Hence, given his motive of seeking entertainment and his character which is inclined towards pleasure, it is a sufficient reason to cause him to decide to go watch a movie. Schopenhauer surmises that the principle of sufficient reason, a principle of logic, has four elements which he calls its fourfold root. The first root is causality. The fourth is the law of motives. The second root is justification, which is how our reasoning is grounded on more fundamental concepts such as logical deduction, empirical observations, and methodological truths, which are the conditions that make thinking possible. The third root concerns the relations in space and time of things to one another. We have already talked about causality and motives, so let us consider the other roots by expanding my example of Jones. With respect to the second root, justification, Jones knows empirically from his past experience that he enjoys movies, and reasons that the exams are still some weeks from now. With respect to the third root, space and time, the cinema is a drive away while the textbook is in front of him on his desk. The relation of space and time between him and his choices are much nearer for the book and further for the cinema, making the textbook preferable. He has two competing motives, but given his stronger desire for entertainment and his weaker desire for studying, despite the nearness of the book versus the distance of the cinema, along with his reasoning that the exams are far away, plus his character of pleasure-seeking, all these suffice to explain his choice. Therefore, given his motives and character, he chooses to go to the movies. For the thoroughgoing materialist, the motives and a person's character will be encoded somehow in a person's physiology. Perhaps Jones's preference for movies is due to how his biology reacts in terms of heightened dopamine levels when stimulated by moving pictures. For the materialist, every phenomena, human or otherwise, is reducible to material terms. However, even if one is not a materialist, the law of motives seems to describe our decision-making process well. One's character is such and such, and between several motives, one is more compelling for such a character, thus making the choice clear. Our character is what weighs one motive to be stronger than another. The law of motives, in conjunction with one's character, do seem to determine what decision will be made. Even if one has free will, how else can one decide, if not through weighing up one's motives in alignment with one's character? So far we can understand why determinism is compelling. It seems to be a straightforward and simple theory, which hence recommends it according to William of Occam's law of parsimony. It is also in line with the scientific worldview of mechanics and materialism, at least for the post-Newtonian pre-quantum era from the 17th to the 20th century. The law of motives, in conjunction with one's character, explains our decision-making process adequately. If one's knowledge and reasoning abilities, which are influenced by one's education, in addition to one's character, make one motive more compelling than another, why would a reasonable person ever select the alternative? Between boiling sulfur and cool spring water to quench one's thirst, the choice is clear for any reasonable person. Between the movie and studying for Jones, his decision is not so clear, but for those who know Jones's character well, after explaining the circumstances to them that the exam is some weeks away, they will predict with great confidence that Jones would choose the movie. Chapter 3. Compatibilism. Compatibilists argue that one can have free will to choose among real alternative possibilities, though one is always determined to choose a particular way. Jones is not constrained to choose either way. There is nothing stopping him from going to the movies, nor is there anything stopping him from studying. Compatibilists argue that an agent remains free in his choices so long as he is not prevented from making them. For instance, if Jones wanted instead to go skiing, but it is summertime, then he is prevented from making such a choice by the seasons. Let us say he decides to study instead in his room. Unbeknownst to him, his mother has locked his room's door. If he had wanted to leave to go to the movies, he would have realized that he was unable to, which then made the choice of the movies not a possibility. However, since he decided to remain in his room, he does not realize that the choice he has made is de facto his only choice. That is what compatibilism effectively means, since one's choice is determined even though the other choices are not prevented. Chapter 4. Problems with determinism. Determinism by itself, and together with compatibilism, which is a subset of determinism, may seem to be rather winning. However, I outline 9 strategies, by no means exhaustive, that point out problems with determinism. 1. Popperian Falsibility. Determinism and compatibilism seem to explain everything, but they have no ability to make any predictions. They cannot be falsified, since any action whatsoever taken by agents can be explained as determined. The criterion of falsifiability comes from Karl Popper, who stipulates that a theory, if it is to be scientific, must put forward some claims that are testable, and hence falsifiable. While determinists may argue that in general, metaphysical theories are not attempting to claim the status of being scientific theories, a theory that seems to cover both an outcome and not the outcome is suspect. Besides, determinism gets its credibility as a theory from its seemingly scientific worldview of materialism, that all is determined by an ineluctable chain of cause and effect. Hence, to claim that it is as a theory not attempting to be scientific is disingenuous. To illustrate, say Jones chose to study at home. Determinism will say that the conjunction of his motive to get good grades plus his character of being studious led to his choice of studying over the movie. Say he instead chose to go to the movies. Determinism will say that the conjunction of his motive to be entertained plus his character of pleasure-seeking caused him to choose the movies over studying. When a theory can explain outcome A and then use the same mechanics to explain outcome not A, it seems somewhat worthless. 2. Burden of proof. Since determinism gets its credibility as a theory from its seeming alignment with the scientific worldview of materialism, it has to prove itself through making a prediction that is falsifiable. Yet it is unable to do so since it makes no predictions, and in fact does not have any capability to make any predictions. It, however, lays out a thought experiment known as Peircian-Laplace's demon. If there exists a super intelligent being, say a demon or a supercomputer, capable of taking in all the relevant data, say their position and velocity, of all the fundamental particles in the universe at one instance of time, which could be the Big Bang, though any particular moment of the past suffices, and then has the computational power to work out all the ensuing outcomes in the next moment and subsequent moments, the future can be completely known. It is convenient for the determinist that such a computer has not yet arrived, so this claim cannot be verified at the present moment. The determinists are making an in-principle argument which goes like this. Given the state of the art of technology today, we are unable to make the calculations to predict all events. However, there may come a time in the future where we achieve such a technological capability that we will be able to make the calculations. Hence, not in reality, but in principle, our theory is correct. This future promise is inadequate since the scientific method is purportedly that of observation and empirical evidence, and based on their own method, they have none. As Henri Bergson writes, it is impossible to call a thesis scientific which is neither proved nor even suggested by experience. Moreover, even if the opponents of determinism concede the point that the technology may in future exist, this in-principle argument is still wrong because of what I have termed the Popperian-Laplacian Paradox. 3. Popperian-Laplacian Paradox. Popper explains why such a Laplacian demonic computer, even if it exists, must fail. It collects the data of the state of the universe at time 0 and generates predictions for time 1. Since the computer is itself a part of the universe, part of the data that has to enter into its computation is its own state. While it knows its own past state, it cannot know its up to the moment state, which is the future state of the universe of which it is a part of, since it will need some time to input the data of the past state and then some time to use it to compute the state of time 1. However, as the computer computes, its own state is itself changing, which then needs to be accounted for, which means the computing process will take too long such that time 1 would have passed. This is true for infinitely small time increments. The input process, computations, and its results have to occur simultaneously for this problem to go away. As far as we know, even with quantum computers, calculations take time, even if that time is very short. However short, it is not instantaneous, as will be required since any time step in between will suffer from this problem. Hence, even in principle, such a prediction, in advance of the time it is predicting, is impossible. 4. Non-Fatalism. Even if we permit that all these problems of the Laplacian demonic computer are overcome, if anyone knows the predictions for the future, they can act to thwart them, which then means that the predictions will turn out wrong. Knowledge of the predictions modifies behavior, which then falsifies the predictions. To prevent this from happening, the predictions must be kept secret, hence making them less useful. They remain useful as a proof of determinism, but will be plagued by skepticism. Skeptics can accuse the computer of fraud, since it can more easily just give us the state of the world through a camera than through computing the predictions, which is likely to be slower since a camera's recording is almost instantaneous. If the computer does predict correctly, its results will be indistinguishable from what the video recording of the present tells us. Thus, the future still remains unknown, leaving it effectively open. Hence, even if determinism is true, we need not be fatalistic. 5. Peircian Uncertainty. Charles Sanders Peirce, along with the ancient Greeks, believed that in the beginning there was chaos. His metaphysical theory is that chance is the first governing principle ordering matter, after which bias can develop purely out of chance to then become habit and later law. However, chance remains, and what seems to be law is only law-like, where all scientific laws are in fact merely statistically probable rather than necessary. This runs contrary to determinism, where a cause necessarily results in an effect. He points to laws governing viscosity and the kinetic theory of gas, which are statistical in nature, aggregating the behavior of individual molecules to give an average result, which seems law-like but is merely probable. 6. Quantum Indeterminism. Since then, other examples such as half-lives marking the decay of radioactive substances and the position of electrons are known to be only statistically probable rather than certain. At the heart of quantum mechanics is the concept of quantum indeterminacy, where there is an uncertainty concerning the state of fundamental particles until observed, though it is not clear whether such uncertainty at the particle level translates to uncertainty at the macroscopic level. 7. Peircian circular argument. Peirce also points out an epistemological problem with the principle of sufficient reason. According to it, every event has a sufficient reason. So, what is the sufficient reason for the principle itself? Either there isn't one, which then contradicts the principle, or the principle has to be self-evident, which it does not seem to be. According to Schopenhauer's fourfold root for the principle belongs to justification, that is, how our reasoning is grounded and is methodological. Following Immanuel Kant, the principle is part of the framework of our understanding, meaning it is in us and not in the thing in itself. Schopenhauer tells us that it only applies to the world as representation, that is, the phenomenal world and not the world in itself. Hence, it is neither self-evident nor universal. The argument for it relies on itself, making it a circular argument and hence invalid. 8. Bramhall's theological argument and consequences. Theists have long argued that God created us with free will and because we have free will, we have moral responsibility for our actions. Hence, for the theist, that truth from divine revelation is itself sufficient as an argument against determinism. A counter is that since God is omniscient, He already knows all that will happen also in the future, leading to a predetermination based on divine knowledge. If free will is maintained, then it reduces to a compatibilist position, and if not, a deterministic one, which flies in the face of religious doctrine for human moral responsibility, since we cannot be responsible for actions out of our control. This difficulty has been debated fiercely by theologians. Putting theistic arguments aside, John Bramhall and many others worry about the implication determinism has on moral responsibility, since if we are not in control of our actions, we cannot be responsible for them. However, the inability to attribute moral responsibility is not in itself an argument against determinism, since it simply means that if determinism is true, we have to overhaul the way our justice system works. 9. Common sense approach and qualia. Despite all the prior objections to determinism, the biggest problem it faces, in my opinion, is that determinism defies our common sense intuition. Internally, we feel agency over our actions. When we act, we feel an intention within ourselves to act. As a strategy, we can also attack the basis of determinism, which is materialism. We have feelings and sense experiences known as qualia, which are irreducible to a material basis. Qualia such as pain or what it feels like to see a color. Materialists either deny the existence of qualia or relegate it to a side effect of material phenomena called epiphenomena, a byproduct of a physical system such as the body, which does not have any influence on the physical system. However, imagine being in pain and being told by a materialist that there is no such thing as qualia, or that it is an epiphenomenal illusion, and hence there is in fact no pain. Your response of tears has in fact nothing to do with your pain. I suppose that if the pain was great enough, it would suffice to cause one to lose all hope in materialism and hence determinism. In addition, it fails to explain why such a byproduct even arises, making it no less mysterious than the existence of the immaterial. Chapter 5. The World as Will and Representation. I want to examine a particular compatibilist account more closely. Schopenhauer, in his magnum opus, The World as Will and Representation, presents his metaphysics. Following Kant, there is the phenomenal world, which Schopenhauer calls the world as representation. This world is familiar to us, where we see cause and effect, and the law of motive at work. More broadly, the principle of sufficient reason applies. When we kick a ball, it moves according to Newtonian laws of mechanics. When we have competing motives, the one more in line with our character will be our choice. But what is this character? In Kant's account, all we can know are phenomena or representations. While we observe representations of things moving, of people taking action, there is this other world as well which underlies it. Kant denies that we can have any knowledge of the thing in itself, which is what Schopenhauer calls will. According to Schopenhauer, this will is a will to life, what Baruch Spinoza calls conatus, a striving to maintain one's existence, which applies to everything. For inanimate objects, it is inertia, where according to Newton's first law of mechanics, states that an object remains at rest or in uniform motion in a straight line, unless acted upon by external forces. An object's state remains the same until it is acted upon. If it is stationary, it remains that way. If it is moving, it remains that way. This inertia translated to living things is a living being's striving to continue living. This manifests in two ways: self-preservation and reproduction, according to Schopenhauer. Self-preservation is to preserve one's own life, while reproduction is to preserve the existence of the species. Schopenhauer tells us that how we know about such a will is because we intuit our own inner lives. Like any other object in the universe, we as individual human beings are also objects. An external observer will see our legs and hands moving. We ourselves also observe our limbs in action. We also observe other things moving. But our observation of ourselves moving is special, different from that of the external observers. When we move our arm, we can see with our eyes our arm moving. However, we in addition feel within ourselves our will, willing our arm to move. The willing and the motion of the arm happen simultaneously if our will so desires. This tells us that minimally we know something about our own will. By analogy, since other human beings are similar to us, we know that they too have an inner life or will. If we extend this intuition further, we know that all things have an inner life or will. Schopenhauer thinks that there is a scale of the strength of the various wills. The will of inanimate objects is more basic, while the will of living things are stronger. Schopenhauer builds up his case, finally concluding that there is a universal will in which all things participate. In the aspect of the world as will, the principle of sufficient reason does not apply. This is because causality and the other fourfold roots of the principle are part of the structure of our understanding. Just like we see cause and effect when two billiard balls collide, it is merely how we, human beings, understand the event. The billiard balls in themselves do not know about causality. I have a theory of how the will came to be what it is, inspired by Peirce. Say there are two persons, one who wants to preserve himself and the other who has no such interest. The second person will perish, and assuming that such drives are genetic, that person's genes will have vanished. If this person has reproduced, then that gene will be passed on, and somewhere along the lines of his descendants, their lack of self-preservation will cause them to perish and their line to die out. Hence, by and large, only those whose genes encode for self-preservation remain in existence. Likewise, if a person does not have the will to reproduce, and does not, then his line will die with him. Over time, the only people still in existence will be the ones whose genes encode for reproduction. This same method of thinking applies to the will of anything that remains in existence. The reason why the will to life has its characteristics of self-preservation and reproduction and whatever other characteristic is due to how those who do not will have perished over time. It is not a result of some grand goal, grand teleology of nature. According to Schopenhauer, while anything on the level of representation is determined, since it must obey the principle of sufficient reason, the universal will itself is free. It is radically free to the extent that it is a blind striving, without any end or aim and lacking any purpose or meaning. Because it has no goals and hence no values and hence nothing is meaningful to it, its striving is blind. It is indifferent to whether an individual living thing should survive or perish, whether any object should persist or be destroyed. Because the wills of individual things are parts of the universal will, the individual wills are not free since they are subordinate to the willings of the universal will. What does this imply for us? We do not have free will. Schopenhauer thinks that a person's character is fixed when she is born, this fixity of the character reflecting the fixed will of the individual. On the level of representation, a person's actions are determined because of the law of motive, where competing motives faced by the person are weighed by the person in accordance to her character, which is inborn and hence fixed. Because one's character is fixed, there is then no point in trying to change it. Instead, if one wants to influence a person's actions, one will have to shape her motives. For instance, to discourage a person from stealing, the penalty needs to be tough enough such that it gives the person a motive not to steal. Say Jones's character is lazy and greedy. If presented with equal rewards but one path is easier, he will, in line with his character, always take the easier path. Say to steal is fast money, requiring only a day of planning and execution to get $1,000, while to earn that amount through honest work, it would take him a week. If the choices were just those and there is no risk in him getting caught, it will be logical for him to steal. However, if the penalty is a year in jail with a very high chance that he will get caught, it may then make no sense to steal, since he will lose a potential $52,000 earned over a year of work just for $1,000 of fast money. There is a motive to steal, but also a competing motive to avoid jail. It is not because he has become a more honest or moral person. It is simply that the competing motive of jail avoidance now outweighs the motive to steal, judged by his character who wants to make money as efficiently as possible because of his laziness and greed. Let's say he is misinformed that jail time is only half a day and there will be no criminal record. Then his motive to steal outweighs the motive to avoid jail. However, by teaching him that the jail time is instead a year, it will lead him to decide and hence behave differently. In addition to learning the facts, Schopenhauer also believes that education teaches us to reason better. However, despite being a compatibilist determinist, Schopenhauer tells us to deny our will so as to escape suffering. This seems contradictory, since if determinism is right, then we do not have free will, and hence no way to take the action of denying the will as he suggests. However, by having read his book and now learned that the pursuits our will send us on can only lead to suffering, it changes how our motives stack up against one another. Given a fixed character who wants to pursue happiness, which to Schopenhauer is the minimization of suffering, and having learned from his book that acting in accordance to the strivings of the will leads to suffering, our motives now weigh differently, leading us to deny our will. Hence, denying the will is possible even in a deterministic world. Section 5.1 Assessment of Schopenhauer's Theory. Schopenhauer's account is internally consistent, though I submit that he is mistaken in one crucial regard. He considers character as inborn and fixed, unchangeable throughout one's lifetime. I first want to hypothesize why he thinks that, and after propose why it is wrong. I also want to consider if his theory depends on the fixed essences of things, and hence whether, if essentialism is debunked, it will then invalidate his theory. The notion that things have a fixed essence is not an original idea of Schopenhauer's. In fact, it is an idea that begins in antiquity and has become an intellectual tradition called substance metaphysics. Schopenhauer admits that Plato and his theory of forms are a major influence on his thinking. Plato teaches that there is a realm of forms where the idealized versions of things exist, like a heaven where all things are the perfect forms of themselves. In this realm, there will be the perfect forms of concepts such as justice and love, and perhaps of natural kinds such as horse, man, woman, and so on. The instances of these forms that exist in our world participate in the forms, such that a man can be identified as a man because we recognize in him the form of man, though even the best existent man would be a poorer version of the form of man. How we recognize that he is a man is because he possesses the essence of the form of man, which is what makes a man a man. In that way, we can put things in their correct categories. For example, we categorize my cat into the species of cat because my cat possesses something that I recognize as essential in the form of cat. What that thing is debatable. Is it its tail? If so, then if it loses its tail, is it no longer a cat? And if so, then what is it then? Plato's theory of forms is beset with difficulties which he himself admits, and later thinkers try to correct. I want to look at one of these reforms from Plato's student Aristotle. Aristotle's ontology is known as hylomorphism, which is composed of two Greek words, hyla, which means matter, and morphe, which means form. Matter is the substance that underlies all things and is called prime matter. When a form, say the form of a man, is added to prime matter, that is what forms a man. The form, according to Aristotle, cannot exist separated from its matter, and hence Aristotle rejects Plato's conception that there is a realm of perfect forms and its notion of participation. Later, Aristotle considers the soul of a human being as his form, where the form is what is essential in that person. This idea that there is something essential, that each thing possesses an essence or form, is rather appealing. For instance, let us look at a table. If we spill some ink on its surface, we still recognize it as a table, despite its surface now being stained. If we burned a small hole on its top or on one of its legs, yes, we still recognize it as a table. But if we remove the top altogether, leaving just its frame, it will no longer be a table. If we remove all its legs, it will no longer be a table. Some actions made to the table leaves its essence intact, while some destroy its essence. But once the carpenter has assembled all the parts of the table together, it is a table. There is something essential in the table that makes it a table. Schopenhauer subscribes to this conception of essences, where a thing once formed and until it is destroyed will retain that essence. Essence is what is essential to the identity of that thing. Painting the table does not change the essence of the table. Its color is not essential. It can have different colors and still be recognized as a table. But if we remove all the legs or its top, then we have removed something essential to the form of a table. He thinks the same of a human being's character. A person's character or will is the essence of that person. Jones has a lazy character. If he stops being lazy and becomes hardworking, his friends may recognize his bodily appearance, but may ask jokingly, "Whoever you may be, what have you done with the real Jones?" While the notion of essence seems to be a good way to understand things and aids us in the categorizing of things into species and genera, which is the very foundation of science, specifically biology, there is a danger that we let our theoretical conceptions lead us to understand everything in that way. Peirce points out how Euclidean geometry leads us to think of the straight line as more simple than other curves, when in fact, any curve is as simple as any other curve. Bergson makes a similar criticism, where to study an object, we break it down into conceptual parts. Yet if we put these conceptual parts as understood by theory together, we do not get back the true reality of the object, but instead a series of vignettes of the object. He gives an example of how a series of sketches of Parisian landmarks is not and can never be the true Paris. Besides, Schopenhauer is influenced by the materialist conception of reality, which comes from the scientific worldview already strong in his post-Newtonian era. He is clearly an admirer of science, bringing many scientific ideas of his day into his writing. Substance metaphysics was also the prevailing paradigm then and arguably also today. Hence, Schopenhauer is not inconsistent when he considers individual human beings to be of a fixed essence, manifested in the person's character. But is this correct? In his conception of the will, he has a gradation of the will. It is weak in its manifestation as inanimate objects, and as things become more complex, the will becomes stronger in them, culminating with the human being. Even within the human being, the will manifests in the human being's organs, with the organs for nutrition lesser in its strength of will than the organs for cognition. However, even in this gradation, Schopenhauer is still sticking to the paradigm of essentialism. He predates Charles Darwin, having passed away in 1860, a year after Darwin's On the Origin of Species was published, and so he had no chance to have read it. He, however, knew earlier evolutionary theories such as Jean-Baptiste Lamarck's, which he rejects. He did not have the benefit of knowing about quantum indeterminacy, which may provide an opening into the role of chance. Schopenhauer did not manage to make the intellectual breakthrough of a process metaphysics, which might have changed his view of a deterministic universe to one where libertarian free will can possibly exist. Chapter 6. Libertarianism. Section 6.1. Process philosophy. Not that process is something unknown in Schopenhauer's time. The earliest proposer for a process philosophy is Heraclitus, a pre-Socratic who flourished during the 6th century BCE. His slogan is Panta Rhei, meaning everything flows. Plato quotes him as saying, "You could not step twice into the same river." Thinkers closer to Schopenhauer's era also had processual ideas. Spinoza's God is one with the universe, evolving alongside the universe to become its divine nature. And of course, Schopenhauer's contemporary and arch-enemy, G.W.F. Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, tells us of a similar becoming of absolute spirit through a dialectical process of sublation. These are missed opportunities for Schopenhauer, who considers being as something fixed, as opposed to a thing that becomes what it is. Section 6.2. Existentialism. The French existentialists bring the notion of becoming to the forefront. Existence precedes essence, says Jean-Paul Sartre. This phrase is the reason why the existentialists are named as such. As opposed to Schopenhauer's idea of an essence that is given to us when we were born, the way an inanimate object is given its essence upon completion of its creation by its creator. The human being first comes into existence, and as her life progresses, develops her essence. Human life is a work in progress, never finding completion as long as the person lives. A being for itself who strives to become a being in itself but can never reach it because that is only possible for a god. Existentialism sets freedom as front and center of its discourse, where our life projects should extend the freedom of everyone. Yet, process metaphysics is not in itself sufficient for free will to exist. For that, we need an immanent agency that is not merely a mechanism enacting the principle of sufficient reason to come into being. In the existentialist's account, for a thing to achieve such a state of freedom, it must first become conscious, after which it becomes self-conscious, realizing within itself through reflection its lack, creating a desire and hence a value for what it lacks. To act to achieve this subjective value is for this being to become a being for itself, Other thinkers, such as Max Scheler, who precedes Sartre, talks about spirit. Spirit is the source of agency within beings with spirit, according to Scheler. Section 6.3 Philosophy of Mind. Scheler explains how spirit arises in our phenomenal world. He presents a four-stage evolution of mental life. The lowest level is in plants, which already possess a general drive towards growth and reproduction, but is passive in meeting these needs. Its food of inorganic material is gathered from where it is placed into the soil, and it requires the forces of nature such as wind, rain, and insects to aid its reproductive pollination process. Hence, it has no need for mobility, sensations, a central nervous system, memory, or consciousness. The next level is in animals, which possess instinct. These instincts are inherited and inborn, helping it carry out actions even for events it has never experienced before, such as preparing for laying eggs or winter. The next level to emerge is habit, which comes from associative memory, which conditions behavior. Out of instinct emerge single sensations and representations, where specific drives seek gratification from the fulfillment of instincts, creating a meaning different from a mere automatic instinctive response and is directed towards usefulness. Successful behaviors are repeated, becoming habits. From associative memory emerges the fourth level of organically bound practical intelligence, where an animal can encounter a novel situation atypical for its species and yet be able to make a reasoned choice in furtherance of its practical needs. These four levels, however, are mere precursors to what Scheler considers the essence of human beings, which is spirit, something not reducible to more fundamental categories. Spirit is not just psyche, an ability to reason or think. It involves volition and emotions. Spirit arises because of self-consciousness, where its self-awareness enables it to transcend the demands of its body, to say no to its drives. The spirit, according to Scheler, does not possess its own power and gets its energy from its repression of the drives. The energy that would have been expended by the drives is then diverted towards the task of the spirit, such as penetrating beyond appearance to comprehend the essence of things. The ability to choose, to reject what the drives compel it to do, to decide upon its own values and act accordingly, is the work of spirit. Even if one does not want to conjecture additional entities such as spirit in keeping with Occam's razor, Hans Jonas tells a similar story as Scheler, but employs only a naturalistic explanation. He draws on evolution to explain the ascending journey from simple to complex life forms, where the movement from immobile plants to mobile animals gave rise to perception of what is present to their senses, which in human beings are further developed into imagined ideas of what may be absent. With choice comes the ability to select, hence creating values and emotions in animals. The next step is when perception directed towards the external world turns inwards, made possible by the human ability to imagine through ideas what it does not literally see, giving rise to the ability to self-reflect. Coupled with emotions and values, human consciousness then develops a conscience, presenting a need for ethics to guide our lives. While Jonas does not go on to argue for free will, a natural continuation of his thesis is that there is an evolution from conscience to free will. Development culminating in a human conscious inner life makes human beings an event of cosmic significance. More than a human event, it may be an event for being itself and affect its metaphysical condition, a coming to itself of original substance. Scheller's claims are bolder than Jonas and the existentialists. The arising of spirit in the universe in human beings is a first step for the cosmos itself to achieve self-consciousness, so as to subsequently achieve a cosmic spirit. God is, for Scheller, not the uncaused cause, the unmoved mover of the medieval philosophers. Instead, it is something more Spinozan, a God that comes to be, co-created by human beings and nature. Human beings advance the coming of the cosmic spirit by carrying out spiritual activity, where we direct ourselves towards grasping the absolute. Whatever you may think of Scheller's triumphant theory or tale, spirit is one way of explaining how agency can arise in living beings so that they are able to act autonomously of natural forces. That is one strategy to tackling Schopenhauer's allegation that character is fixed. Even without postulating another entity such as spirit that is in Scheller's case over and above psyche, understanding life as process is sufficient as demonstrated by Jonas. More precisely, Robert Cain proposes self-forming willings as a way our characters develop. How I think of this is that early on in childhood, our characters are more malleable. When we are presented with a choice, how we choose influences who we become. Say the two options are to go spend the day of glorious weather hiking up a mountain or staying in and watching television. Both can arguably be equally pleasurable for the child. If he chooses to watch TV this time, then the next time a similar decision point comes up, he may become increasingly inclined to do the same as habits form. The first time he faces that decision and chooses, it is a self-forming willing that informs his character development. But I oversimplify. Just as process allows development, it also allows change. Just because one has eaten with relish sugary food all one's life does not mean that one cannot one day decide to say no to it. Cain's example is Martin Luther, who was summoned to the Diet of Worms, a medieval court. He had been expected to recant his teachings, but instead proclaimed, "Here I stand, I can do no other." Luther was not using the doctrine of determinism as his defense. Instead, Cain explains that the reason Luther has arrived at his position of conscience was because earlier in his life, he faced moments of self-forming willing, which informed his character, such that despite the threat of punishment, he was unable to adopt any other position. Just to clarify, it is not that if the kid watches television once, he is doomed to an inactive lifestyle. Just like a person who drank too much alcohol one evening may feel bad the next day and swear off over drinking, the impact from our choices informs our conception of what we should do and how the person we want to be is. For instance, Luther may have early on told a lie or recanted even though he knew he was right. The shame he felt at that point may have informed him that he did not want to be a person who lied or recanted even when right, which then constitutes his self-forming willing. Be it spirit, self-forming willings, or some other way, process allows for change in one's character, which negates Schopenhauer's idea of a fixed character. I do not think that Schopenhauer's theory depends on human beings having fixed characters. His law of motive still remains viable, where motives in conjunction with one's character determine one's actions, even if that character is changeable. In addition, his gradation of the will can permit that the higher forms of the will have free will. The existence of free will certainly complicate his theory, but it will strengthen his idea that we can deny the will in order to alleviate our suffering. Section 6.4. Bergson's duration. Another possible angle for reconciliation is to consider Bergson's account. While cause and effect applies to material objects, it does not apply to immaterial objects with the ability to remember and thus learn from its prior experiences. Hitting a ball in the exact same spot with the exact same force in the exact same direction with the exact same bat, the ball will, ceteris paribus, land at the exact same spot in the field. However, hitting a human being the same way will evoke a different reaction the second time round, because the person will recall the first time and react differently due to his memory of the previous experience, perhaps raising his hand to shield from the blow. Hence, cause and effect does not apply, at least not in the same way as with an inanimate object. If the Schopenhauerian universal will is a will that is able to remember and learn, that is, it is conscious, not as a supra-will that animates all the individual wills, but instead a Spinozian superpositional sum of the individual wills, then we can understand why the universal will is not subject to causality, since no state of this universal mind is ever the same as any that has gone before. The states flow into one another, learning from prior experiences as duration elapses, making subsequent states different from any prior states. Hence, causes are always acting on what is effectively always a different entity, because of its new state of mind, leading to a different effect. Thus, the law of cause and effect, where a cause always leads to the same effect, no longer holds, since the entity on which the cause acts on is continually changing, hence leading to a different effect. Section 6.5. Compatibilist Libertarianism. We have so far considered how process, chance, spirit, evolution, and self-forming willings aid the positive argument for libertarian free will. In addition, Christian List proposes that even if the subatomic level of physics is deterministic, which it is not according to quantum mechanics, this does not necessarily mean that the higher levels are also thereby determined. This is because there is multiple realizability at the higher level from the same behavior at the lower level and vice versa. A particular mental state in an individual can have multiple realizations at the physical level. Say Jones has a mental state of anger. His neuronal pattern can be one particular way or a different one, both manifesting at the mental level as the same state of anger. In the same way, molecules in a pot of water may be arranged in multiple ways when the water is boiling. The macroscopic phenomena is that of boiling, but at the microscopic level, the molecules are moving differently. Conversely, higher level phenomena can have multiple realizations, though the lower level can be the same. For example, at the lower level, we may have a table, while at the higher level, the same table is in one instance used to study on, while in another is exhibited as an art piece. Following this reasoning, List's strategy to argue for the existence of free will is twofold. The first is that free will is a higher level phenomenon of psychology and not a lower level phenomenon of fundamental physics. Hence, free will and other human and social phenomena such as society and economy have to be understood at the higher level, since they cannot be properly understood at the lower one. His approach is novel because it removes the dependence on whether fundamental physics is deterministic or otherwise, which makes it compatibilistic. If we are looking for free will at the physical level, we are simply looking in the wrong place, he asserts. In the case of conscious being and free will, the higher level is the psychological, which describes thoughts and beliefs, preferences and desires, goals and intentions. List explains, what our inability to find freedom at the lower level shows is merely that free will is not a physical or neurophysiological phenomena. It does not show that it is unreal. Free will is not to be found in molecules or even the brain. However, it does not mean that higher level phenomena are not connected with the physical. Instead, higher level phenomena supervene on the physical. When a person acts, it is ultimately the result of some underlying physical process. Nonetheless, it does not make the higher level phenomena any less real. Besides, the same physical phenomenon can be realized in multiple higher level phenomena. Chapter 7. Conclusion. The early sections of the essay explain the determinist and compatibilist positions, after which I present a series of strategies to undermine them. Nevertheless, these strategies are negative arguments, which is why I then explored positive, albeit speculative accounts of Scheller, Jonas, the existentialists, Kane and Bergson, so as to provide a pathway for things in the universe to develop free will. Because of the striving within living beings towards self-preservation and reproduction, which Schopenhauer calls will to life, values and emotions are formed within such beings to inform their choices according to Scheller and Jonas. The mental ability to form representations of absent things allows our perception to then turn inwards, giving rise to self-reflection, allowing human consciousness to develop a conscience in Jonas's account, and spirit in Scheller's account, which allows us to say no to our natural drives if we deem that something more valuable is at stake. This development of consciousness and spirit is an event, an initial step for the cosmos to subsequently become conscious of itself and achieve a cosmic spirit. In our effort to grasp the absolute, in Scheller's words, we carry out spiritual activity and in that way advance the coming of the cosmic spirit. An outcome of libertarianism is that human behavior is at best probable and at worst unpredictable. Moreover, libertarianism does not claim to hail from a scientific materialist worldview and so does not pretend that it should be considered scientific. Besides, psychology, or simply the mere observation of human behavior, has vindicated the probabilistic nature of human behavior. As Scheller points out, the ability to defy our physical drives, to say no to them, is a mark of the human spirit. Even if a Laplacian demonic computer is built and works properly, it will still be effectively useless because the data it outputs of position and velocity of atoms still need to be interpreted to represent higher level phenomena, which it in principle will be unable to since there is multiple realizability at the higher levels following list. While quantum indeterminacy does create room for the physical manifestation of free will, by itself it is not a proof of libertarianism, since indeterminism also undermines libertarian free will. If how we choose is random, then we also do not have control over our choices. Hence, quantum indeterminacy can only form a part of an argument for free will, where to be able to choose between genuine alternatives requires some uncertainty prior to the decision. Kane has proposed some possible biological mechanisms where quantum indeterminacy may be amplified through the brain's thermodynamic inequilibrium as the underlying lower level process supervened by a higher level mental deliberation. It is not entirely clear to me what it would take to definitively prove that human beings have free will or otherwise. Part of such proofs may be scientific, where discoveries such as a gene that encodes for free will or a chemical biological mechanism is shown to be the underlying mechanism for consciousness. If we believe that what we are dealing with is in fact irreducible to the physical, such as an immaterial spirit, then no such proof can ever be found, and perhaps all we can continue to do is to carry on with intelligent discourses in a dialectical manner, but never definitively getting to the truth of the matter. Nonetheless, other than philosophers arguing determinism's case, I cannot quite think of any endeavor where we do not act as if we have free will. In the earlier mentioned survey, the professional philosophers were asked about their beliefs, but in addition should have been asked about how they conduct themselves pragmatically, which will be the true mark of their beliefs. do they not at least some of the time move with self-initiated purpose? Libertarianism is in line with our self-understanding that at least for some matters, we act with purpose and agency. For most effective purposes, our actions demonstrate our belief and commitment to libertarianism. This, however, is not proof, since like in Spinoza's and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz's account, all living things could simply be playing out their already predetermined roles, the way a piece of theatre is played out to the end, or the way a chemical reaction continues to its conclusion of thermodynamic equilibrium. I started the essay with a rhetorical point of how we know we have free will simply because we feel an inner sense of agency. This is a rhetorical move because such feelings, no matter how unshakable, are not in themselves proofs. Just because we feel something does not make it real, and common sense has time after time been shown to be wrong. For instance, how it seems commonsensical that the earth is flat, which it is not, or that the sun revolves around the earth, which it does not. They, however, point to an intuition which at least merits being considered as starting points for inquiry. Hence, I shall not refrain from raising another rhetorical argument. When we watch a gymnast demonstrate his athletic prowess in the Olympics, do we not applaud? When we lose ourselves in a book or movie, immersed in the world that the author or filmmaker has created for us, do we not admire them? When we see the hurt and pain of those left behind by a murdered son, lover, or parent, do we not feel their anger mixed with sorrow towards the killer? Yet if we were told that the gymnast, the author, filmmaker, and the murderer could not have helped their actions, that they were seemingly like puppets merely carrying out the actions determined for them, and hence unworthy of the praise or blame that we heap on them, can we accept that? Our sense of agency is integral to our understanding of ourselves. We do not view ourselves as helpless puppets being strung along, but as beings who make things happen. When we succeed, we feel satisfaction. When we fail, we are pained. Are these merely irrational emotions which are unwarranted, since cause and effect would have brought us to these successes and failures anyway? If our best explanation of life is that it is determined, is there something wrong with us such that what we feel is contrary to that explanation, or is there something wrong with the explanation? Yet because we are unable to provide a rock-solid proof of free will, we cannot be certain that it exists. For all practical purposes except philosophizing, we carry on as if we do have free will, rewarding and castigating others as the case may be, as if these recipients deserve their deserts. When we do this, we think of these judgments as justice, when if the determinists are right, it will be the very height of injustice. Choice alone is not sufficient to establish free will. However, after a choice has been made, there still remains a choice of how to feel about that choice. For those choices that provoke further reflections, we are faced now with a meta-choice whether to be happy, sad, or plain nonchalant about them. We can also just choose to put it out of our minds or have a more varied response. This meta-choice arises from out of our reflections on the first level choice. A determinist like Hobbes or Schopenhauer may argue that our personality, social and cultural conditioning, and context are what determine the way we decide on our meta-choices. Hence, the ability to reflect on our choices and then any subsequent reflection on our meta-choices is like looking into a mirror that is placed directly opposite another. We see our reflections ad infinitum. The determinists will assert that at the bottom of all these reflections remain the law of motive or causality. The libertarian will explain that these choices are ultimately made by our agency, which I will call spirit. Spirit is a power within sentient creatures that is irreducibly and intrinsically free and self-directing. It is the very essence of our being, but not in the sense that it is predetermined. Its essence is to be self-determining. The buck stops with this spirit of ours. A determinist might mock this by saying that the libertarians are claiming miracles with every free choice that we make, since it defies the law of nature of cause and effect. Only a god can break his own law. But is that really so hard to believe? A rock tossed into the air should fall to the ground, but it does not. Is it a miracle if a human being holds out her hand to catch it? If things proceed the way they should go without interference, such as climate change, and if societies take action to stem their output of greenhouse emissions, is that a miracle? To claim determinism is ultimately to claim materialism, and I assert that to claim libertarianism is to claim that there exists more than a material, that there are more than just physical objects and their interactions. There is an innate spiritual being within sentient creatures, spirit being a sui generis category unto itself, separate from the physical world, but which interacts with the physical world. If we look into physical systems, from the galactic to the quantum subatomic, we will for sure fail to find it, but that is only because we are looking in the wrong place. Spirit is not to be found in the physical. How do we know then that it is there? We feel it, and feelings, qualia, cannot be explained by a material account other than to discount it as epiphenomena. If one denies the existence of spirit, then one will be unable to fundamentally explain libertarian free will. If one accepts that human beings, among other sentient creatures, are imbued with spirit, then libertarian free will is obvious to the point of not requiring argument for it. Thank you for listening to the Philosophical Bachelor.